And not only that, we've had another game released today. Callisto Protocol is now out, and as a horror game fan, I am so excited to get stuck into this. But we've had a few mixed reviews via tweets, so we're going to have a look at a few of the tweets at how you've been feeling about playing the game. Now here's one. Callisto Protocol is fascinating for all the wrong reasons. Combat is its most frustrating feature and also its worst. Functional in a specific scenario that the game quickly moves away from, buckles under the weight of many bad decisions, and extremely disappointing. That's a shame. Sadly, also joining the ranks of people who were disappointed with Callisto Protocol. It looks beautiful, but any tension it builds is overridden by frustration in its combat. That's such a shame. But do you know what? That's two people's opinions. You know what? I want to hear some good stuff. So we're actually joined now by a Deputy Guides Editor at Gfinity, Luke Hinton, who is going to tell us some good stuff about the game. How are you, Luke? Thanks for joining us.
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. Were you quite hyped to play this game? Because it's been teased for a long time and, you know, the teasers look so good.
Do you know what? I wasn't hugely... I'm a massive horror games fan.
Yeah.
But I've always been a Resident Evil diehard. So
yes.
As soon as they announced that new Resident Evil 4 remake, there wasn't really any other horror game that could really eclipse that. So it did sneak up on me,
yeah.
But I was pleasantly surprised.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is, of course, made by a brand new studio as well, Striking Distance. So this is their first release. I mean, do you think it's quite a good first release to go for? Do you think it's strong enough to kind of cement them in the scene?
Very. I think it's understandable that a lot of people are comparing it to Dead Space because,
yeah.
I mean, given the history, given the head of Striking Distance is the former, co-creator of Dead Space, those comparisons are inevitable.
Yeah.
So some would say it has an identity crisis, but as somebody who never played Dead Space, I will eventually, but I haven't played it. People that haven't played it won't have those comparisons, and it does feel fresh. We haven't had that sort of space horror, aside from the Alien spin-off games recently. We haven't had survival horror in space since Dead Space. So it was quite refreshing to sort of see that come up again.
Yeah, I was going to say, because obviously, yeah, like you said, Glenn Schofield's had his hands on it, and he knows how to make those dystopian worlds in space, because he obviously did Dead Space. But yeah, I was going to say, I mean, how does it kind of compare to the likes of, say, Alien Isolation, for example, in terms of scares and that horror feel? Does it kind of compare quite well?
It's interesting in terms of the scares, because I think it mainly goes for the jump scare territory instead of sort of building up atmosphere. But what I would say, one thing that's really good about it is the world design, the environments, all really play well into that sort of tension. You could open a locker and bam, something jumps out at you.
Yes.
You open an airlock, bam, something comes out of you there. So it's less sort of, the world creating the scares, but there are things around you that will pop up, and it doesn't have the same environmental feeling as the Alien games because they've got so much lore to pull on.
Absolutely.
Whereas this is obviously its own thing. But it does, I was jumping plenty of times.
Yeah, and like you were saying, as I'm also a Resident Evil fan myself, so I'm very excited for that Resident Evil 4 remake. Do you think this game does hold its own in the horror genre? Do you think with everything, all the kind of aspects of this, do you think Callisto Protocol holds its own against, some of the other horror kind of competition, I suppose, in the scene?
Definitely, and I think going forward, obviously without getting into anything, I think it could stake its claim as one of these big tentpole franchises.
Oh, great.
We haven't, in the past decade or so, Silent Hill sort of disappeared.
Yeah.
We haven't had much aside from Resident Evil in the big, frequent survival horror franchises that have consistently released. And I can easily see this do it. It's got enough to its plot and enough to its characters that you will leave it thinking, okay, I've enjoyed this. In a few years' time, I'll absolutely go in again.
Yeah, I'm still very excited to play it. I've not kind of let those tweets kind of taint my view. I mean, because tell us a little bit about the combat and things like that. Because I know, obviously, like someone he said they weren't a fan of the combat. How did you feel about the combat in the game?
The combat is very, very melee focused.
Is it?
And
yeah.
That's the first few encounters. I was getting punished a lot because it does take a while to get used to.
Yes.
One thing it does that some people may struggle to sort of get to grips with is uses the left stick as your block and your dodge rather than a dedicated button, which isn't commonly done.
Yeah.
But it can feel more intuitive. You pull back on the stick, your player moves back. You pull left, your player moves left. And it takes a while to get used to that, as well as you progress through the game. The enemies you face obviously get stronger.
Yes.
It's not as easy to just run in with the baton and attack everyone. You need to be more precise in how you plan these encounters. And it can be tough. And there are a lot of times where I was constantly restarting and thinking, this is hard, maybe I need to put it down the difficulty mode. But it's satisfying once you get into the loop, you know how to approach each different enemy because there are several, and you feel more prepared going into each encounter.
Yeah, but I kind of like what you've said there with the kind of controls. I mean, obviously you are used to having a dedicated button to attack and things like that. So the fact you've got to use the left stick, although that is something to get your head around, I mean, it's quite a nice, unique kind of way of doing it. Did you feel that was quite a unique feature to the game that kind of like gives it a little bit of an edge?
Yeah, and it makes it more sort of engrossing in the fact that it's entirely down to you. It's so easy in other games. You can just hold down a button and rely on your character dodging or blocking, whatever. But you can't do this. It's all, every mistake you make, it's down to you've moved the wrong way or you haven't done anything in time. So it becomes more immersive in that way, which I feel like survival horror always, you need to have the odds stacked against you. So by having it really, really quite implicitly mapped to your movements, it makes it a much more engrossing experience.
Definitely. And do you think with Striking Distance obviously being a brand new studio, do you think they're going to stick with the horror theme? Or, I mean, it's hard to tell, I suppose, but do you think they might stick with horror or do you think they'll bring in a few other genres into the studio?
I'd like to think they'll stay within this region, even if it doesn't become the main thing. Obviously, horror isn't the biggest franchise in the world, and especially considering it's a spin-off of Crafton, who are so known for PUBG and Battle Royale shooters. I mean, there's bound to be something more like that down the line. I mean, with this game, as with most survival horror games, it does veer into action the further in you go, veers into more weapons, different encounters, not always being able to rely on sneaking past or taking enemies out. So I think there is definitely scope to stay down this lane, which I would enjoy given the expertise they have in-house and the groundwork they've built in this world and the gameplay so far. But, it's inevitable that eventually they'll give something else a go.
Definitely. It's quite exciting to see. It's all brand new, so it should be quite a nice little journey as well. And Luke, obviously the contender for Game of the Year is obviously on the cards at the moment. Have you got a personal Game of the Year for you that's come out this year that you've really, really loved?
I do. Prior to this, I would have said either Sonic Frontiers or Lego Star Wars, purely just because they're both so pure and fun and I can just spend all my time with it. But I think this takes it, to be honest. I'm such a horror fan. It's been so long. Well, it's been a year and a half since Resident Evil Village, which was the last proper AAA survival horror game. So to have something to sort of keep us satisfied until next year, where there's so many coming out, I really enjoyed it, and I was engrossed the whole time I played it. So Callisto is my Game of the Year.
Oh, I love that. Do you know what, Luke? It's so good to hear that because I'm very much ready to play. I'm going to be streaming it on Monday. I'm getting prepared to get ready to stream it and things like that. So in terms of horror games next year, you mean there's a couple, but Resident Evil 4, what do you think to the look of Resident Evil 4? Do you think it's going to be a nice remake? I mean, it looks good.
It looks incredible. That Resident Evil 2 remake that came out a few years ago is one of my favorite games of all time. That was terrifying and it looks incredible. And this looks like it's going to do a very similar thing. Obviously, it's sort of difficult because they're remaking a game that isn't quite as old as those original top-down Resident Evil games, so it doesn't need as much patchwork to bring it up to the modern AAA expectations. But, I mean, I'll be playing that day one. There's nothing else I'd rather play next year. Oh,
fantastic. Well, Luke, thank you so much for coming on the show. And look, we might get you back to talk about Resident Evil 4 next year, so thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of your day as well.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.